What is the number one thing you learned in your 28 years that would help you now as a citizen and an employee of Pike Electric and possibly a state senator?
Well, as far as I guess government goes, is how inefficient really government is. Being in the logistics field, you see things like one thing kind of drove me crazy, waste taxpayers' money, is at the end of the fiscal year, they would look at the budget, and if they had money left over, instead of basically giving it back to the taxpayer, it's, well, we need to spend up this money, because if not, our budget for next year is going to be less. So they just put a wish list of stuff that they don't need. You know, it's stuff nice to have, but stuff they don't need just because they don't want it to affect the budget for next year.
Welcome to another episode of Best of Johnston County, brought to you by Breeden Law Office. Our host, Jonathan Breeden, an experienced family lawyer with a deep connection to the community, is ready to take you on a journey through the area that he has called home for over 20 years. Whether it's a deep dive into the love locals have for the county or unraveling the complexities of family law, Best of Johnston County presents an authentic slice of this unique community.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Best of Johnston County Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Breeden, and today as our guest, we have Christopher Sessions, who is the Libertarian candidate for the North Carolina Senate on your November 5th ballot for District 10, which is all of Johnston County. He is running against the incumbent Republican State Senator Benton Sawrey of Clayton. Anyway, so we're going to talk to Christopher Sessions today about some of what he would like to see North Carolina do about the legalization of drugs, school choice, the elimination of income taxes, and other things that you will find interesting and in line with what the Libertarian Party believes, which a lot of people may not be aware of. So anyway, but before we get to that, I would ask everybody if you would like, subscribe, and follow this podcast wherever you're seeing it, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, LinkedIn, TikTok, any of the social media campaigns that the Best of Johnston County Podcast has. It will make you aware of future episodes of the Best of Johnston County Podcast. And the Best of Johnston County Podcast comes out every Monday. And if you'd also be kind to give us a 5-star review down at the bottom and give us comments about what you like or don't like about the Best of Johnston County Podcast. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, no problem. So let's start with what's your name and a little bit of biographical information.
Yes, I'm Chris Sessions, like you said, running for Senate District 10. First and foremost, I'm a family man. I have 4 children, a beautiful wife, Grace Sessions. I've lived in North Carolina for about 20 years now. I was brought here by the military. I'm retired military, lived in Johnston County for the past 6 years. I have a master's degree from Franklin University and currently work at Pike Electric as the warehouse manager.
Okay, so where did you grow up?
I grew up in Utah.
Utah?
Yes.
You know, I just heard on the radio yesterday that Utah was rated the happiest place, the happiest state in the nation.
It is. It's a beautiful state, but I've actually lived in North Carolina longer than I lived in Utah, and I'm used to the warm weather. So I'm making my home here.
So what drew you to wanting to join the military?
In high school, even though I ended up going to college and getting a master's degree while I was in the military, I knew college wasn't for me, and just patriotism and a chance to have a good career without having to go to college, I chose to go into the military.
So you went into the U.S. Army, I believe.
Yes.
So did you go in like at 18, straight out of high school?
I did. I actually joined the National Guard while I was still in high school. And then after I graduated, I worked in a cafe for a little while, realized, that wasn't for me. Needed something with a little more opportunity. So I went ahead and went active duty.
Okay. All right. And so what are some of the duty stations that you had while you were in? I think you did 28 years.
Yes, 28 years. Started out in Georgia, spent my first 8 years in Columbus at Fort, where it was Benton, and then Hunter Army Airfield in the Ranger Battalion. Then I went overseas to Germany and Italy for a while. Then I came to Fort Bragg, and that was 2001, and spent basically the rest of the time, except for 4 years, I was at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, I've been in North Carolina.
Okay. And so what did you do in the military?
I
I
was
think you made it all the way to Master Sergeant, I think.
actually Sergeant Major.
Sergeant
retired.
Major, excuse me. I
Yes.
don't want to shortchange you there. I get
No,
all those
that's
things
fine.
mixed up. So
No,
anyway.
understandable. That's fine. But yes, so I was a cook in the Army and actually ended up doing logistics as the wars progressed. As went overseas, things were moving to contractors, so the kitchens were all ran by civilians. So I got into the logistics field, and that's kind of what steered me after the Army. Is how I ended up, running a warehouse.
So you were responsible for, I guess you were running kitchens.
Yes,
to
so
get
I
the
was
food
running kitchens, and then running all logistics. I was actually the logistics sergeant major for all of Iraq in 2016. So,
Oh man. So what does a logistics sergeant major do?
so move people, equipment, food, bullets, fuel, just everything that the warfighter needs to do his job, basically.
Right. And it's not like you can just drive from point A to point B when there's bad guys in between point A and point B.
Exactly. There's a lot of planning on what moves by ground, what moves by air, what routes can be taken, all that stuff.
Well, that's interesting. So where'd you get your undergrad degree from?
I'm at Franklin University.
Franklin University.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you
Yeah.
end up getting an MBA from there too.
Yes.
I got you. So when did you retire from the U.S. Army?
In 2017 was my last day. Actually, my official retirement is 2018, but I had leave. So
Okay.
actually my last, day in uniform was the end of 2017.
Right. I assume you were honorably discharged.
Oh, yes. Retired. Yes. I have my military retirement.
Well, sometimes in my office here, when you're dealing with divorces and stuff like that, we do represent military people that are not honorably discharged. And we've helped some people fight their discharge papers. And let me just tell you, when you're not honorably discharged, it can be a mess, particularly trying to get any kind of retirement, VA benefits, stuff like that. So I used to think as a child, everybody was honorably discharged, but I now know that is not the case. And I'm sure you saw many soldiers that were not honorably discharged during your 28 years.
Yeah, unfortunately, yes. Put a few out that just couldn't cut it. Good people, but just the military wasn't for them.
Right. I get it. It's a lot of work. It's a ton of work. I don't think people realize quite how much work it is and the sacrifice people make with their families and stuff to be in the military.
Yeah, it's definitely not for everybody. It is sacrifice. I am glad to be out and be able to go home every night. Spent many years total, away from home, deployed and stuff. So it is nice being able to come home every night.
So what is the number one thing you learned in your 28 years that would help you now as a citizen and an employee of Pike Electric and possibly a state senator?
Well, as far as I guess government goes, is how inefficient really government is. Being in the logistics field, you see things like one thing that kind of drove me crazy, waste taxpayers' money, is at the end of the fiscal year, they would look at the budget, and if they had money left over, instead of basically giving it back to the taxpayer, it's, well, we need to spend up this money because if not, our budget for next year is going to be less. So they just put a wish list of stuff that they don't need. It's stuff nice to have, but stuff they don't need just because they don't want it to affect the budget for next year.
And I've heard that so many times, over the years. I was fortunate to work at the legislature back in the mid-90s, and we would get stories about that where state employees were calling in saying, we're just spending money on stuff we didn't need, stuff like that, which is unfortunate because, it is the taxpayers' money that's getting spent on stuff that's not necessary sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. You look at the military budget and then other budgets, and it's just a lot of money that we could definitely be saving. I know we're talking national and I'm running at state level.
But same thing at the state level too.
I'm sure, absolutely there's all sorts of places money can be saved.
So tell us a little bit about Pike Electric. I know that's a pretty good sized company. What do you do for them? What does Pike Electric do?
So Pike Electric is a electrical contractor, and for me, we were a contractor for Duke Energy. So they put up the power lines. They do some emergency restoration, but a lot of what we do, where I work out of, is new construction. So when they building subdivision, apartment complex and stuff like that, Pike Electric and other contractors are the ones that go out, run the power lines. And I run the warehouse for them. So all the poles, wire, transformers, everything you see out there that's bringing electric to your house comes through my warehouse or a warehouse like mine.
Okay, cool. So does Pike Electric do any work for anybody other than Duke Power?
Yes. Where I'm at is only Duke, but
Okay.
Pike Electric, they're in most states now. When I joined, it was 26, but I think they're up above 40 states. So they contract with, multiple power companies throughout the country. And they're also into engineering, gas, to a lot of stuff. It's a pretty big contracting company.
Well, cool. Well, let's talk about some of your platform. I've been reading your platform online, so I kind of know where you're coming from. It's very in line with the Libertarian Party. One of the things you would like to see is the decriminalization of drugs. Talk about that.
So first and foremost, it's my top priority is medical marijuana. As a veteran, I've seen my fellow veterans greatly benefit from it. Life-changing, truly. People that say that it's not a medicine have not seen loved ones and friends and family, the benefits that it's caused. I've seen fellow veterans come off, multiple different drugs that had terrible side effects, started smoking marijuana, and were able to come off these other drugs and basically have their life back. So that's why that's one of my top priorities, just because it's personal to me. Other thing with decriminalization of drugs, I don't think people should be thrown in cages for something they put in their own body. First and foremost, it's about who owns your body, you or the government. But also, you look at, I don't know the numbers now. I heard that opioid deaths are coming down, but they peaked about 100,000 a year. And you look at Portugal, which decriminalized all drugs and made it more of a medical issue than a criminal issue. And they would cut their deaths by 80%. So by making the drug issue a medical issue instead of a criminal issue, we could save up to 80,000 people a year. Now that's on a national level, and I'm running for state. But, we could set the example here in North Carolina for the other states to follow.
Okay.
Have family law questions? Need guidance to navigate legal challenges? The compassionate team at Breeden Law Office is here to help. Visit us at www.breedenfirm.com for practical advice, resources, or to book a consultation. Remember, when life gets messy, you don't have to face it alone.
All right. And another thing on your platform is school choice. Talk a little bit about that.
Yes. So we do have a fairly good school choice program in North Carolina. It's not fully funded. I would like to see it fully funded. I would like to see the money follow the student so that the parents can decide how to best educate their child. Mike Ross is the Libertarian running for governor, and he actually did a podcast. I think it's called Why We Learn or How We Learn. You can go to my Facebook page. I have a link. And, it's basically let's allocate the money to the child. Let's, look at what's best, whether it's religious, charter, homeschooling, the micro schools, really good idea. Let a teacher take, 10, 15 children. They can do it in a home. They can pocket most of that money, spend some on the children, and give these child a better education, more, one-on-one, and make more money as a teacher.
Right. And I actually somewhat agree with you, but the counter argument would be, how do we assure the rigor and the standards of these micro schools or some of these charter schools that don't have to answer for the test scores and stuff like that? What's your response there?
I would say that's up to the parents. It's just like anything else in the free market. The parents make a choice, or a customer makes a choice. And if they're not getting what they want out of it, they're going to move their children. There are some bad parents out there, but those bad parents, no matter what, those parents that don't take their children to the government schools, that's not going to change. But most parents do care about their children. They care about their education. And if the child's not being educated, they're going to pull them out. We don't need the government to come in there and have test standards, because the parents are going to have their own standards for their own children.
Right, right. I don't disagree with you at all on that. So the legislature has, well, the state Senate has passed the fully funding of the Opportunity Scholarships. And for those of the people listening that aren't aware, there is a movement among the legislature. The state house has not taken it up yet. We're recording this at the end of July of 2024. By the time this runs in a few weeks, the legislature may have come to an agreement to fund these Opportunity Scholarships. But what that would allow you to do is to have the money, as Mr. Sessions is saying, follow the student to a charter school or to a private school, and the new bill would eliminate the income caps. Initially, you had to be in poverty to get it, but now they're trying to open it up to any income level to where the money would be able to follow the school. I think it's going to cost to fully fund it. What the Senate passed a few weeks ago was $450 million in additional funding. But I don't believe that would be additional funding because those kids would come out of the public schools and so I think it might save the public schools some amount of money there too. So for those of y'all listening, if you're not familiar with the Opportunity Scholarship Program in North Carolina, definitely Google it, follow it, see what the legislature decides. If they don't come to an agreement here in the next few weeks, I'm sure it will be up for debate again in the next session that begins in January of 25 with the new state Senate and what will be a new governor at that time. And I know that Governor Cooper is against it. I know that Josh Stein, the Democratic gubernatorial candidate, is against opportunity scholarships and against the expansion of school choice. So I guess we'll have to see who wins these elections to see whether we'll be able to move forward on that in North Carolina.
Yes, absolutely. And one thing I want to point out is, you brought up the standards and testing. And one reason why I'm against increasing and putting these standards on the private schools and the homeschooling is I don't want a government takeover of the private schools. I don't want private schools to look like just like the public schools. I want parents to have a true choice on how their children are educated. And the only way we can do that is get the government out of education, especially the private sector. We can still have government education, but they need to be out of the private sector and let them come up with new ways and more innovative ways to educate the children.
Yeah, and I know that you support the elimination of the state income tax.
Yes. So on the income tax, I guess I'm evolving on that. I think that's an easy one that other states have done. And that's why when I initially ran, I came out with that. I'm bringing up Mike Ross again, and on his platform, he talks about simplifying the tax code and eliminating a lot of taxes and bringing them into one. So whether it's eliminating the income tax, eliminating the sales tax, property tax, because you start looking at these and we don't even realize how much you're taxed. If you start adding it up, it's a lot more than we see. So what I want to do is, in a perfect world, Mike would be elected government and, a governor, and I would be elected to the Senate, and we could work this plan and basically just consolidate everything so it's more transparent. So the people see what they're being taxed, and then they can decide, do they want all these programs? Is it worth the tax? So whether it's eliminating the income tax, eliminating the property tax, eliminating sales tax, let's get one tax that's transparent, that you see actually how much you're paying, and then hopefully lessen it.
Okay. And one of the things that you've also got in your platform, another one that you and I kind of agree with, is you'd like to see the state eliminate some of the licensures, particularly the ones that are not involved in healthcare. Talk a little bit about that.
Yes. So I want to eliminate the licensing for anything that doesn't have to do with public safety. And right now, we're the 8th worst state as far as occupational licensing. Nearly 22% of our jobs require licensing. And even healthcare, not necessarily licensing, but we need to look at certificate of need laws, which require the government to give hospitals permission to expand or build new hospitals. So I'd like a more free market approach, let them decide what the community needs, not the government. And I actually have a list of some of the jobs. I don't have everything memorized. If I can take a second and go through. So a barber requires over 1,500 hours and a licensing fee of $120. A manicurist requires 300 hours of training. A hair braider requires 300 hours of training. A landscape contractor, they don't have to have any training, but they do have to have a license. Auctioneer, 80 hours of training. Travel agents have to be licensed. Interior designers have to be licensed. And massage therapists require 500 hours of training. So, and that's just a few. There's nearly 800 occupations in North Carolina that requires licenses. As you see, most of them have nothing to do with public safety. It's about raising government funds, protectionism of who's already is in those professions. So, yeah, I'd like to eliminate pretty much all occupational licensing.
Well, and those licenses create barriers to entry. They make it harder to start a business. When you talk about the military, as you move to state, you might not need a license to do a manicurist or whatever, wherever you were. And then that's what your career is. And your husband gets sent to Fort Liberty now. And now you can't work in your profession because you don't have the right stuff to get the license.
Oh, absolutely. It's a hinder for opening business and for finding a job. And like I said, it shows no benefit to society as a whole, to safety. It's just protecting the people that are already in those jobs.
Well, yeah, and creating government entities to support it, because somebody's got to review the licenses and give the licenses. And then most of those things have a board that the taxpayers pay for that oversee the licensing. So I agree with you 100%. We have way, way too many license requirements in North Carolina. And they made me, as an attorney, pay a separate licensing fee on top of my state bar licensing fee until this year. So for 23 years, I had to pay a fee to just be a business in the state of North Carolina. I think it was $50. It's ridiculous. Finally, they got rid of that after the state bar charged me $300 or $400 a year for the right to have a law license in this state. So it's a lot.
Yeah, and another thing they do is limit like what the people can do in these professions. Like I was reading about paralegals on what legal advice they can give. So you could probably speak more of it, but people could save money if they could go to a paralegal for things that they could handle versus having to pay a lawyer to get that legal advice. Also, nurses were one of 15 states that nurses have to fall up under a doctor to do almost anything to prescribe medicine. So if we got some of them barriers out of the way, it would save customers a lot of money.
And I'm familiar with the paralegal thing. There are states around the country that allow paralegals to become licensed, and then they're able to do certain minor things without an attorney's supervision, drafting documents. Not a lot different than what you would see with LegalZoom or something like that. I don't know eventually that'll probably get to North Carolina. Right now it's on the West Coast. I know they have it in Washington State. So we'll see, if it can create access to the courts and access to justice for people that can't afford it, I would be for it. I actually know some paralegals in these states that are these, they have a name. I can't think of what it is. Basically a certified paralegal, and they do a nice job. And I talked to them about, and they do a very good job of knowing what they can do and what they can't do. So I've seen where it can work, particularly in Washington State, where they have it, where I know a couple of people that actually are that. So anyway, well, good. I'd like to thank you for coming on. How can people get up with your campaign or contribute to your campaign for the state Senate?
So I have a page on the Libertarian site. It's lpnc.org/sessions. I'm also on Facebook. It's Sessions for NC Senate. And on X, it's Christopher Sessions for NC Senate at Sessions for Senate.
Okay, cool. Well, we would like to thank Christopher Sessions for coming on and being our guest on this edition of the Best of Johnston County podcast. He will be on your ballot in Johnston County on November 5th in the general election, running against the incumbent state senator from Clayton, Benton, Sawrey, who is a Republican, and it's his seat, and Christopher Sessions is running against him. So anyway, if you want to learn more about his campaign, go to the sites he talked about, visit the Libertarian NC website as well. Anyway, until next time, I'm your host, Jonathan Breeden.
That's the end of today's episode of Best of Johnston County, a show brought to you by the trusted team at Breeden Law Office. We thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to sharing more interesting facets of this community next week. Every story, every viewpoint adds another thread to the rich tapestry of Johnston County. If the legal aspects highlighted raise some questions, help is just around the corner at www.breedenfirm.com.